Hi everyone, my name is Leah Dale. I'm an Extension Master Gardener volunteer here in Wake County, and I am here today to help with the Ready Garden Grow classes. This is an introduction to vegetable gardening, and the topic today is the 7th in the series on cool season gardening, one of my favorite topics. So we're going to get started in a minute, but in case you weren't a part of some of the other classes, I wanted to let you know what this series included. So let's go to the next slide. Actually, first, let me tell you something about Extension Master Gardener volunteers. We are exactly what the name says. We are volunteers here in the county, and we are sort of the communication arm of NC State Extension. So we go out in the community to disseminate information about gardening. And the key to what we do is we are providing information that comes directly from the universities that do agricultural research, such as NC State and North Carolina A&T here in North Carolina. But our information is unbiased and it's research-based. So we are doing all of this hopefully to make you more successful and have more fun with your gardening. It's not a lot of fun to garden if you don't have success. I know from experience. So one of our communication tools is Facebook. So I encourage you to like our Facebook page, Wake County Master Gardeners, and make sure you check it periodically because we're all the time updating and putting information there. You can also contact us directly. You can email us at mgardner@wakegov.com. And we also have a hotline. Right now, because of COVID virus, we are not going out into the community, and we're also not going to the extension office to answer the phone. So jot down that number, 919-250-1084, because hopefully sooner rather than later, we'll be back in the office, and we welcome phone calls. But in the meantime, email us because you can get in touch with us that way. So like I said, this has been a whole series on vegetable gardening. And this is the 7th class, Cool Season Gardening. But we've done things like selecting your vegetables, preparing your garden, planting and harvesting, some of the common problems you might have. So if you haven't checked those out, please do so because all of those are in an effort to make your garden successful and to hopefully circumnavigate any potential problems that you might have. So what are we going to talk about today? Well, specifically in cool season gardening, we're going to talk about what vegetables we're talking about because not everything grows in cooler weather. And what is the difference in cool season gardening than it would be during warmer seasons? I'm going to give you some planting tips and talk about harvesting, and then some ways that you can protect your plants and also extend your growing season. Here in North Carolina, we have fairly moderate winters, so we're able to grow for an extended period of time. And that's one of the most amazing things about gardening here in North Carolina. We definitely have cool season, which would be the spring and the fall, but with the right equipment, you might even be able to extend your growing into the winter and over the winter. Some of the things that like to grow in cool season are greens like arugula and kale. Our North Carolina favorite, collards, are a cool season crop, but you can also grow things like leaf lettuce and head lettuce and some vegetables that are in the cruciferous family like broccoli and Brussels sprouts and collards, as I mentioned earlier. So we have a handy dandy chart that will tell you what will grow here. And I encourage you to Google. Let me find the name of it. It is called the crop chart. Exactly what it is. So if you were to Google crop chart, North Carolina Extension or NCSU, you'll come up with this, and it's two-sided. On the one side, it has warm season crops, and here on this side are the cool season crops. And the really nice thing about this is all information specific to our area. So in the first column here, we've got the vegetables. So you can go by that, I want to grow some, I'll stop at the start at the top, arugula. The next column over is the variety. So these are recommended varieties for our area. And again, NC State has tested these. These are the ones that grow best here. You can probably find lots of others, but these are the ones that we can guarantee are going to do better. So this looks like Runaway and Rocket are the two varieties that are best suited for our area. The plant family is important because we recommend that you rotate your planting so that you are not doing the same plant family season after season. That's because plant families, if things that are in the same plant family, and here we're seeing that broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, and another kind of cabbage are all in the C cruciferous family. That means they're all going to want the same kind of nutrients. So if they're planted in the same place over and over again, they're going to deplete the soil of those particular nutrients that they need to grow. So they're not going to do as well year after year. The other thing is that pests that are common to one plant in that family are also going to like to munch on the other things in that family. So you may have a buildup of pests in that area. So we recommend that you rotate every season plants from different families. And that's covered in some of the other classes, but it's a really important part of gardening. The next column here is your planting window. And so for cool season, again, I mentioned we have the spring garden and the fall garden because those are the times when the soil temperatures are going to be the coolest. So in the spring, I would want to plant arugula between February 1st and March 15th. And then again, a second time I can plant it in the fall between August 1st and September 15th. So that's one of the nice things about these cool season plants is that you can put them in twice a year and get twice the bounty. Whether to plant seeds or transplants, not all plants grow well from one or the other. So again, this has been tested here in our area of North Carolina, and it's going to tell you that arugula is going to be best grown by seed. So you can count on that and buy that product. How long does it take the seeds to mature? So if it is a seed, it's telling you 40 to 50 days for it to mature. So you can plan that out. And it's a transplant. Again, you have a period of time where those plants grow to maturity. Footprint, again, is really important because it tells you what the mature plant, how much space that's going to take. So it's really easy to plant these seeds really close together and you get these little baby plants come up and you want to keep them all because they're all so cute and they're going to be potential vegetables, and why would I want to kill them? But you are going to harm your other plants by keeping so many close together. So it feels kind of strange that you're going to need a 9 by 9 inch area for one arugula plant, but you do. When it gets big, it needs that much space. And if they are too crowded, then they're fighting for nutrients, they're fighting for water, they're fighting for sunshine, and they won't do as well. So please take to heart these recommendations for spacing. Do they need vertical support? They need something that's going to hold them up. And most of these cool season crops are small and aren't going to need any until you get down to peas. Peas, of course, are going to need to grow up on some kind of support. Can they take some shade? And this is a little bit, it can be a little bit deceiving because we are not talking full shade at all. Shade in the vegetable world is 6 hours of sun versus 8 hours of sun. But again, it's still recommended that they get the 8 hours. So a couple of these are going to be able to take a little bit less sun, and that's because they're growing in the cooler times of the year when the sun is not out as long. So that's one of the reasons that that's there. But you'll notice that broccoli and Brussels sprouts do not want any sun or any shade, excuse me. So they have to be planted in a full sun, as bright as it can get area. And then succession planting. This is one of the best examples is with radishes. If you were to plant your entire packet of radish seeds, you would have all at one time. You would have all of these radishes come up all at one time because they're basically going to grow to maturity all together. What in the world do you do with an entire seed pack full of radishes? I can't think of any dishes that would need that. Maybe if you pickle them in some way. But instead, you could do what's called succession planting. So every 2 weeks, you would plant another row of whatever the plant is. So say it's radishes, you would plant radishes every 2 weeks. And that way you have them growing to maturity 2 weeks staggered so that you don't end up with a wheelbarrow full of radishes. So one of the handy references for planning is that this reference tells us what, like I said, the varieties that are going to grow well in our climate, the plant family, again, all the things that I just talked about, their date ranges, whether you use seeds or transplants, how long it takes them to mature, how much space they take, whether they need some kind of vertical support, if they will tolerate any kind of shade, and if you can do succession planting. So you may have noticed in some of those dates for planting were the end of the summer months. So there is some overlap sometimes with summer crops. So you're going to have to remove something unless you just have tons of space and have enough space in order to put in a cool season crop alongside warm season crops. But most of us don't have the luxury of that much space. So we've got to remove some of the plantings that we already have. And that again can be really hard to do. It's hard to pull plants out of the ground, I know, but you want to move on and move on to something new. You may have noticed that your warm season crops are already starting to look a little peaked. They're not producing quite as much. They may have had a lot of disease infestations by this point at the end of the summer. So go ahead, be brave, pull those plants out to make sure that you have room for your cool season, because they need some start time to begin maturing so that they can be ready in the cool season. So if you use transplants, then the maturing time is not quite as long. So you would be able to keep some of those warm season crops in the ground a little bit longer, but eventually they all are going to need to come out to make room. One of the bonuses for cool season growing is that we have fewer pests because they don't like the cold weather. They go and hibernate or do whatever they do, move somewhere else. So we have fewer in our cool season crops, which is nice. Um, Another cool thing is, no pun intended, but they tolerate some light frost, most cool season crops. And even some of them will tolerate some freezing weather. So if it happens to freeze, leave those plants alone. With warmer weather, warmer days, they may come out with some new growth or revive in some way. So you never know. Here in North Carolina, we fluctuate between warm and cold a lot. So these plants, again, have been tested, do well with those temperature changes and ranges. Some crops are actually even better after a frost. So I know my mom would only buy collards after the first frost because she said it changed the flavor for the better. Other plants like Brussels sprouts and broccoli, people say that as well. But, and like I said, leave your plants alone if we have a hard freeze because you may find that they recover. So when you're getting ready to plant these cool season crops, one of the first things to do is to clean up the bed, get rid of some of the old debris, old plant material, so that you have a nice clean space to do more gardening. And if you are using some cool season crops that are in the same family as your warm season, but most of them are not. But again, if you've planted the last season there, you want to rotate where those crops are being grown. Especially if you're doing spring and fall plantings of the same thing. They should not go in the same area again. Um, some plants you plant in the fall, but then you're not going to harvest them until the spring, such as onions. That's one thing that needs the cool weather to actually grow. And after you've planted, we do recommend that you put a layer of mulch because that's going to help insulate your plants and keep them from actually dying from the super cold weather that we may or may not have, depending on our North Carolina fluctuations. But again, if we have a hard freeze, the tops of those plants may freeze because of the water content in them. But down below, especially if you've mulched, they're fine and they'll keep growing. But then again, in the spring, especially if it gets really hot soon, then a lot of things will bolt, which means they flower and go to seed, and that oftentimes affects the flavor as well. So once that happens, that crop is done for. There's no saving it once it's done that. So you've grown some of these amazing cool season vegetables. What do you do with them? How do you harvest them? So here are 3 different methods: the cut method, the pull method, and the cut and come again method. So cutting vegetables is often done in the summer. We cut the produce off and use it, such as bees. We don't use bees in the garden. We do use them, but we don't harvest them. Beans, peas, tomatoes, melons, you're going to cut those off and leave the plant, and you use something sharp so that you're not harming the plant. You may have tried to pull something off before and found that you've broken the stem, so we recommend that you're out there with scissors or a sharp knife. Now, cool season oftentimes use the pulling the plant method, which is where you'd actually pull it out of the ground. So our radishes that hopefully we will do with succession planting and only have a few at a time, carrots, onions, all these things come straight out of the ground to use and nothing is left. But then there's also the cut and come again method. And that means that you cut off what you're going to use and the plant continues to produce more. So we do that with lettuce and spinach and collards, Swiss chard. So these plants just keep on giving, which is amazing. So I mentioned earlier that there are ways that you can extend the growing season and help protect your plants from super cold or super windy conditions. So let's talk about some of those. Some of them are cloches, there are row covers or low tunnels, we've got cold frames, high tunnels, and greenhouses. And we have a publication called Season Extensions and Greenhouses. So if you were to Google that under NCSU extension, then you would find that document and it'll give you more information. But let's go over some of these real quickly. So the first one is a cloche, and as you see here, we've got handy dandy bottles that are being used to protect plants. So it can be something as simple as this. It's a cover that protects the plant. It's used mainly on small plants because obviously it's hard to get a bottle big enough to go around a really big plant. You can use these water bottles, you can use milk jugs, even grocery bags can be used to cover them. One of the keys is that these things will heat up during the day with the sun directly on them. So you would want to remove them during the day. So this is kind of labor intensive. You've got to pay attention. It's going to get cold at night and you want to protect those new transplants or those new seedlings. Put the covers on and then go back out the next morning and take them off because otherwise they can actually burn your plant up if they're left on during the day when it gets hot. Another solution for a bigger area would be to use a row cover or something called a low tunnel. And low tunnel is the bottom picture, and it's exactly what it is. It's the cover material over a taller area, but not quite tall enough to walk under. So to do this, you use special landscaping fabric, row cover fabric. It's lightweight. You can use plastic, so this low tunnel on the bottom has plastic over it, but it's used to seal and trap in the heat and to keep the wind out. If it's really light material, it can go straight onto the plants, but if it's a little bit heavier or your plants are more tender, you want to use something to hold that material up. So you can use, I've seen all sorts of different things used, wire. If you were lucky enough to save any of the election signs that were out recently, then you could use those. Those are great to hold up row covers. You can use any kind of, not rebar, but plastic tubing in some way, anything that will keep that row cover material up and off the plant. And you can remove it or open it up a little bit if the days are getting warm, because again, that heat just solarizes so quickly and your plants can get harmed with too much heat. So with the way our weather does change day to day, you want to keep an eye on that and decide if that row cover needs to be moved a little bit. One of the best things that the row covers does is to prevent pests from laying eggs on your plants. And so that's a handy use for them as well. But the blossoms have to be pollinated, so they have to be removed so that their pollination can occur. Cold frames are a really neat way to grow some things. You can actually grow seedlings inside this. Um, Depending on the size, but it's a box of sorts that has a hinged lid. So during the day, you open the lid up. Again, it gets super hot in there. If you were to keep it closed, you can prop it up just a little bit, or this one in the picture here is open all the way, but then you would close it at night so that the heat from the day stays trapped inside. It's recommended that they be on a southern or southeastern exposure and also be on a little bit of a slope because you don't want water to collect in these. And if they're lightweight, they can be moved around the garden. But if there are a lot of plant materials in there, it might get too heavy for that. But there are lots and lots of ideas on the internet on how to build these. Seen some really cool ones, really decorative, that are done with old door frames. So it's an awesome way to extend your growing season by having a cold frame. Now, if you have more money and are able to invest in it, you can have a high tunnel or a greenhouse. And a high tunnel is exactly like a low tunnel, it's just bigger. So it actually kind of looks like a greenhouse because it's that big. And the neat thing about these is the sides roll up on them so that on those hot days, again, you're being able to cool that area off so that the plants don't get overheated. It's also helpful to have a little bit of wind to come in to strengthen the stalks on plants. So as you can see in the picture on the left, that high tunnel side has been rolled up. The other two pictures are of greenhouses. So these are enclosures made of glass or plastic that are actually sealed off so that it is pretty warm inside. Again, you'd need to monitor the temperature. Some greenhouses have heating elements inside so that it can stay at a particular temperature, especially in colder climates. But here, the sun will often heat them well enough. I'm not a greenhouse expert, so I would encourage you to look online. Again, we have the extension publication on greenhouses, or there are lots of information. There is lots of information online about that. So I hope you've learned a lot so that you feel confident to go out and do some cool season gardening. It's a fun time. There's lots of really yummy stuff to eat. So we talked about the vegetables that you can grow. Again, check out the crop charts because that's going to give you a lot more information. Um, we talked about the difference in cool season gardening versus warm season, how to plant them and harvest them, and then lastly, some different techniques for protecting your garden plants and extending your season. So again, I mentioned earlier that if you haven't checked out the other classes, I encourage you to do that because we cover anything and everything you might need to be successful in your gardening efforts. But if you come across any kind of question or snafu, call us 919-250-1084. I'm not sure when we will be back in the office to answer those calls, but check and see, or you could always email us. And the beauty about emailing is you can send pictures, and oftentimes pictures are really helpful to help us figure out how to solve your problem or make suggestions to you. So our email address is mgardner@wakegov.com. All of this information is in this Ready Garden Grow Handbook. So I encourage you to download that. It's a great resource. And if all this felt like a lot of information at once, because it was, check out the handbook and you will find more information, or all the information actually, and it's a great thing to look back on. And then even better is our Extension Master Gardener Handbook. It's been made available to the public, and I encourage you to look at that. That has more than just vegetable gardening. We've got pruning, we've got lawns, we've got, I think there might even be a chapter on houseplants and botany, pest control, all sorts of good stuff. And the nice thing about the handbook is there are lots and lots of good pictures, and there are hyperlinks so that you can look for more information. So I encourage you to look at those, and then stay tuned for the next class, which is going to be vegetables in containers. So lots of luck to you in your gardening efforts. Bye.